everybody in the Real Life Momming group. It is another chance for me to go live with you guys and talk about something that I think is super important and that is I think a universal challenge for a lot of parents. And that is the idea that we might not be on the same page as our parenting partner, whether that's a co-parent, could be your spouse, could be your boyfriend or girlfriend, whomever it is. And this also applies to couples who are separated but co-parenting kids. One of the biggest surprises I think that a lot of my clients have when they first start working with me is how little I care if your partner is on the same page. And in fact, when you start working with me, you get a workbook in the mail, you get video tutorials that go with everything in the workbook in addition to our coaching calls. And in the very first module of that workbook, I think it's like the third exercise that I have you do is an exercise about this concept of being on the same page as your parenting partner. Because the belief that you have to be on the same page, it to me is so limiting. We often see our parenting partner as the person who's keeping us from being able to parent. They're sabotaging us. They're undermining our authority. They're negating all of our efforts with our kids and stuff like that. And the fact of the matter is, well, two things. Number one is we can't control our partners, and nor should we. It's not our right. It's not our mandate in life. We can't control this other person. We can do as much as we can to kind of explain our perspective and see if they, agree with us and maybe offer some suggestions and things like this. Hi, Courtney. But we can't actually change them. And probably a lot of you will resonate with this. Usually, the more we try to change them and get them to see our point of view, the more stubborn they become, the more they dig their heels in, and the less likely they are to come around to our way of thinking. So that's point number one. Point number two is even if your partner was totally game to be exactly as close to you as they possibly could and agreed with everything you were saying, you still wouldn't be parenting exactly the same way because you're two different people. You have, each of you has your own view of the world, beliefs, perspectives, view of yourself, idea of what it means to be a good parent, what your job is as a parent, what vision you have for your children. All of those things are different because you're two different people. So what I like to say is like children were designed to be raised by different people, whether it's two different people or a village of people or whatever. They weren't meant to be raised by a monolithic parenting paradigm. And so the idea that we have to be on the same page with our partner to be able to parent effectively really just holds us back. It's not true. We can see evidence all around us that it's not true. And the longer we believe it, the less we try to actually do what we want to do, and instead spend a bunch of our energy pushing against this immovable object, which is our partner. It degrades relationships between couples. It degrades relationships between parents and children. And it's a total distraction. So I really want to invite you into even just considering like, well, what if it weren't important that my partner was on the same page with me? What might that look like? Or another way to ask that question, if you want to journal about this, is if it were true that my partner didn't need to be on the same page as me, how would I parent? How would I be showing up? So what I really love to teach my clients and help them kind of get over these blocks is that each of us gets to have our own individual personal relationship with each one of our children. And that's true for our partner too. So while we are forging our relationships with our kids, they're forging their relationship with their kids too. And we don't get to decide that or dictate what those relationships look like. And we do get to decide and dictate what our relationships look like. So there's actually nothing in this world stopping us from showing up the way we want to with our children. And it certainly does happen that in that case, you wind up having very different relationships. Kids that have very different relationships with their mom or their dad or whichever, their parent and their step parent or whatever. The two different parents in this kid's lives are two different people, and so they relate to those two different people differently. I'll give you the example I always give is about screens in my house to show you how this looks. My husband and I do not agree about screens at all. He thinks that It's totally fine for our kids to have screen time every day and to have way more screen time than I think is appropriate. And I don't. If it were up to me, we wouldn't have even iPads in our house and we wouldn't have screens. And we may have family rules about what screen time is that we have collectively agreed on in theory. But in practice, my kids know that Mike is totally a pushover when it comes to screens. And what does that look like in practice? It looks like I've created a dynamic with my kids where they never badger me about screens. They don't ask for screen time. They don't whine at me about screen time. If they do come to me and ask about screen time, I can say, oh, sorry, it's the weekday. We don't have screens during the week. And that's it. That's the end of the conversation. Mike's experience of parenting our kids is very different than mine. He is constantly being asked about screens and trying to be convinced that it's a special occasion and it's okay, or you're really busy on your computer, Dad, so isn't it okay if I have some screen time or whatever? And so he now is in this constant screen time battle with our kids, and I'm not. And that's fine. It's not a problem for me. I've gotten to choose and create the dynamic with my kids that I want because I've set my boundaries and enforced my boundaries with my kids, and therefore screen time is not a problem for me. It is, of course, complicated and nuanced sometimes. Relationships are messy. They're never, never, never straightforward. But the real thing that I want to hammer home with this video isn't, oh, this is how you should handle the fact that you're not on the same page, but to open your mind up to the possibility that not being on the same page isn't the problem we think it is, and to start your creative juices flowing on how that might be true. How it might be true that you can create the dynamic with your kids, teach your children the things you want to teach them, relate to them in the way you want to relate them, regardless of how your partner is showing up. So I'm going to leave that there and plant that seed for you, and I can't wait to see what you come up with. Share your thoughts here. Courtney's saying, I remember this conversation well. Yeah, Courtney and I were used to be working together one-on-one, and we had to have this conversation. And guess what, Courtney? You are so normal because I have this conversation with almost every one of my clients, including the clients who are working with me as a couple. Being on the same page is not the point of parenting. Really, it truly isn't. This is all relationship based. All the work I do anyway is relationship based. And what I care about most when I'm working with you is your relationship with your child, possibly your relationship with your partner. I'm not interested in controlling or changing your partner's relationship with his or her children, if that makes sense. Everybody have an amazing day. Let this marinate and let's see what you come up with. Bye, everybody.